I've been surprised, Brian Weedai, at the debate raging about penalties in Madden. I've also been surprised about the passion with which some people seem to want more penalties in Madden. I am of the opinion that penalties in Madden equals less fun than if there are not penalties in Madden. And I'll give you a couple examples. First of all, I think you'll agree with me on this. Let's say it's a big 3rd down and 9, and I pull off a really nice 14-yard sweep, and the computer calls a holding penalty against my right guard. Not fun, especially since nothing that I did caused that penalty to happen. Now, on the other hand, let's say that I'm playing somebody and they do something, with the cadence of the snap that causes me to press the button to jump off sides. I'm fine with that because that's an act that I did that was a mistake caused by something. The thing about penalties in the real NFL, penalties drive everybody crazy. I mean, how many times are you watching a play and you see that yellow flag streak across the field and you just go, oh, man, and half the time it's probably a penalty that had no bearing on the actual play. So this concept of people wanting more penalties in Madden, to me, is baffling because a penalty in the NFL is the equivalent of not fun, and a penalty in Madden is just it leaves me just baffled that people want more of them. Why am I so wrong, Brian?
Well, we're talking about realism in video games for the most part, and you find it in every other sport. There are aspects of every sport reflected in video games that you might say aren't fun, Rich, but they're there. Do you enjoy shooting free throws in NBA games? Do you enjoy that disruption of the flow? Do you enjoy, if we had hack a DeAndre, hack a Dwight in the video games, do you actually enjoy that? Probably not, but it's part of the game.
Well, I would argue, however, that foul shots and penalties are very different things. First of all, in NBA 2K, you really only get fouled when you go drive in the lane, right? So you kind of know when you're going to give yourself the opportunity to get fouled. And trying to foul late in the game to stop the clock is a legitimate way to try and get back in the game. Penalties and fouls, to me, completely different.
All right, it is hard to equate it to different games, different
Yes.
sports, but there are things like icing in hockey games that a lot of people in the past would turn off just because it annoyed them, or offsides in FIFA where maybe it wasn't your fault that your guy was offsides when you attempted the pass, but you're still offsides and you lose possession. So you can find elements of that in other games too, but yeah, penalties do disrupt somewhat football games, but they can also benefit you if you're on the better side of the call. Now, the important thing is, though, that the penalties are implemented in a way that is fair and you feel is satisfying. And to you may not be satisfied with a penalty being called in most situations, but it's an aspect of football, and it should play into player ratings and the way that a user is actually playing the game. So if you have poor press corners, but you're pressing on every down at the line of scrimmage, you should be more apt to get those defensive holding calls. If you're going for hit sticks on receivers, you might hit them before the ball gets there. Now, there's different things.
Let's talk about the pressing. To me, if the game were designed well, pressing would be very much risk reward, right? If you
everything should be risk reward, really.
Sure, agreed. So pressing, you should have the risk being that the receiver, if he gets off the press, will leave your guy behind. And the receiver, if he doesn't get off the press, is going to have his route disrupted. Penalties in that, again, to me, a penalty somehow making that better just does not – that's not the way that I would make it better. The only way that I think I should ever see a penalty flag in Madden is if it's something that I or my opponent have done. Like I said, if I or my opponent jump off sides manually, I'm fine with a penalty there. Or when I or my opponent purposefully smash into a receiver before the ball gets there, which is obvious pass interference. Although I would also say I would prefer the game get in the way of that happening to prevent that from happening anyway. But I'm okay with that. But what I don't want to see, Brian, is like more random pass interference calls or more random holding calls or false starts. Like, I understand the concept that it's not realistic, but not everything needs to be realistic in Madden. You don't need TV timeouts. You don't need injury timeouts. So you don't want to wait for 45 seconds while the chain gang comes out onto the field to check a first down. Those are realistic, but it's not enjoyable. It doesn't make the experience more fun. It makes it frustrating.
Well, in a simulation game, I think it actually does make it more fun because you are, again, as long as it's not random, and we can keep going back to that randomness. But I had a situation, this was random. I had a situation where I was driving trying to win the game at the end, and I got called for, believe it or not, an offensive pass interference. That cost me the game, but I actually, maybe it was just because it's so rare, I was actually excited by it happening. It was just a unique, but there's so much in Madden that is about efficiency and how efficient the offense is and how people have go-to plays and everything, and you hardly see any punts in games. A lot of that is because of penalties, because you don't, as an offense, you don't ever find yourself faced with a first and more than 10 or a second and more than 10 or a third and more than 10 unless you got sacked. That's the only way you lose yards in Madden right now. You don't have that challenge, so you end up in third and short situations all the time, which is why teams march up and down the field in Madden. And defense, no matter how much they ramp it up, defense is always at a disadvantage because of that. With penalties in play, yeah, an offense is going to benefit from time to time, but defense can benefit too. And I think in the end, it all hopefully would balance out.
I agree that in the end, hopefully it would all balance out. In my opinion, there are certain things in real sports that do not necessarily need to be brought into the video game equivalent. And penalties in the NFL drive me crazy when I'm watching real games. Frankly, I think there are way too many penalties in the NFL. I tweet about it whenever I'm watching a game. I mean, some of these games have 15 or 20 penalties called. I hate it when I'm watching it in the real game. The last thing I want to see is more of this stuff in Madden. I am clearly in the vast minority on this, though, right, Brian? Because you conducted a poll and the results, I was shocked by the results of the poll.
Yeah, obviously the people responding to the poll are more hardcore type sports gamers. So naturally it's going to trend that direction, but it really was overwhelming. 76%, and we're talking several thousand votes here. 76% wanted more penalties, okay? And 23% wanted approximately the same amount of penalties called, but I think in that instance they want more variety in them instead of just a random clipping call, which has always seemed to get clipping.
Every punt return, every kickoff is a holder or a clipping or blocking behind the back. That is the last thing in the world I want to see in that.
So occasional pass interference or an occasional defensive holding would be cool to have. But I think those people want the flow of the games generally about the same as they are now. And then 1%, Rich, want just no penalties in the game. But I think the unfortunate thing is now we don't have arcade sports games, which is where you could get that experience with, the quicker experience, not interrupted by penalties, doing what you want. So we have everybody coming into Madden with different ideas of what they desire out of a football game, and you just can't meet everybody's expectations with one game. And EA's been trying to do it with Madden for years. And part of the exclusive license, the difficulty that comes with an exclusive license is you have to make a game that appeals to everyone, but because of that, it's never going to excel in one particular area necessarily. So that's what EA Sports has to face with everything they balance, from penalties to anything else in the game, is that there's going to be people who want it ultra realistic, there's going to be people who want it arcade like, and then there's everybody else who's in between, which I think for the most part we fall into the in between. We just trend more towards realism instead of like a ultimate simulation. And that's why I want penalties, because I don't think that changes the way fundamentally Madden is played, but Instead, it improves it and makes it more realistic. And the show, the show is loved for its realism and it nails everything. But football has so much more complication involved in a video game, and the interactions and everything that they have to face these difficult decisions when they're designing.
Well, I'll leave it at this. You and I are not, I think, as polar opposite as I thought we were coming into this conversation. But I will say this. I think we would agree. I think fans would agree. And I think even the people making Madden would agree that there's plenty of ways that they can improve realism in Madden, right? Whether you like the game, whether you're a big fan or whether you're not. I'd rather them work on many other things other than penalties. Let's get everything else going right, then maybe add a few more penalties. That's when I might be okay with more penalties in Madden.
I think there's always, should they be working on this? Everybody has different priorities, right?
Yep.
And penalties have been really desired by people. Realistic penalties implemented properly for years and years, the same people asking for it. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's overwhelming, that everybody says penalties above all else, but for Madden to represent itself as a simulation, you need to have a better implementation of penalties, and they have to be called more often and a wider variety, but it doesn't have to dramatically alter the way you're going to play the game, Rich. And I really doubt, even if EA says they're going to, I really doubt they're going to do something where you're getting the same rate of penalties in the video game that you get in real life. No, that's not going to happen.
That would be horrific. That would be awful. If anything, keep them the same. If you get them up to how they happen in the real NFL, forget it. It'll be terrible because the real NFL has penalties called every 4 or 5 plays.
And the other thing we have to take into consideration too is the effect of sliders, which sometimes work, sometimes don't. As far as penalties go, they never really worked. So you have to give people an option, again, because you're trying to appeal to a wide variety of gamers. You have to give them an option for their offline franchises, their online franchises, whatever. It's not going to affect, unfortunately, online play where you can't customize, but give people the opportunity to set that themselves, how often they want to see penalties. But at the very least, we need greater variety, regardless of the rate they're called at.
Well, I disagree, and I'm really curious to hear your opinion next year when you lose a game because of a random holding penalty on your left guard.
Well, if I have a terrible left guard, or if he's bad in pass protection and he's going up against a good pass rusher, okay. But again, if it's just random and they just throw a penalty out there because they have some 6% of plays need to have a penalty on it, then yes, I will be upset, Rich. But I've lost games due to penalties and various things. I'm more frustrated with other gameplay elements that cost me games. Penalties, I think I could live with. I told you I lost one already on an offensive pass interference, and I laughed it off. Let's just make sure that doesn't happen too often.
Exactly.